Showing up, trickling in here. Welcome everybody. For folks that are joining, we'll just give the rest of the attendees a minute or two to trickle in. Let people in. We're gonna give you something to do so you're not bored, and we'll be basically running a quick poll. You should actually see it on your screen already. The poll basically covers a couple of interesting questions that kind of contextualize who the audience is. I think we'll actually be even sharing the poll results back to you, so you can probably see it as well on your end. But the poll questions are basically pretty straightforward. Question number one is, where are you at in your EV charging journey? Started, not started, researching options. Question number two is, what best fits your role? So which part of the EV charging landscape do you come from? Operations, marketing, technical evaluation, buying team, etc. Question number three, what's your familiarity with the grid and in general battery storage for EV charging? Like how much, investigation have you done into energy storage for EV charging? And finally, do you have a loyalty program for your retail business? So four very important questions. Go ahead when you have a chance, reply to those. Looks like lots of people are already voting. And I think you all can see this on your screen as well, which is pretty cool. So we'll just let everyone kind of have some time to respond to that and give another couple minutes for people to join in. Again, for those that are just joining, welcome. We're going to be giving a couple minutes for people to come in. We'll probably start right around 11:03 or 04. And then while we're waiting, feel free to reply to the poll that you should see on your screen. There's four questions. Where are you at in your EV charging journey? What part of the organization do you come from with your role? And then how familiar you are with battery storage for EV charging. And then finally, given that there's a lot of retailers on this call, do you have a loyalty program for your retail business that you're already implementing? This just allows the audience to kind of see who else is here, and also gives us a full speed on the attendees. So up to about 56 people, lots of participants, pretty good showing. Still climbing, so I'll probably just give it about 30 more seconds, and then once it stabilizes, we'll get started. And anybody that just joined us, welcome. Excited to have you here. We'll be starting in a minute. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and click end poll here. So any final voting? Now's your chance. All right, we're getting some last minute sprints. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull and we can jump into it. I think the results will be shown on your screen. Hopefully, maybe somebody, Lang, if you can see it on your screen, maybe give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay. It looks like it's pretty interesting answers here. So most people have already, oh, love it, getting a emoji thumbs up as well. So a lot of people have already started to implement EV charging. Kind of a mix of roles and responsibilities on the call, which is great. And it looks like also a mix of familiarity with energy storage system. And then not a lot of people planning to implement a loyalty program, and a decent amount, about 21%, say it's a core part of the business, which is pretty cool. Okay, awesome. All right, so with that, let's get started. So thank you for answering the poll. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. So welcome everybody to the November 2024 Electric Era webinar. This is actually our second webinar. We hosted one about 2 to 3 months ago. It's actually on our website. You can find it under our blog page. That was a great conversation as well. We'll also be posting this webinar and a quick summary of it on our blog following the event. So feel free to check that out if you're interested in looking at what else we've been talking about. But today we're probably going to be talking about in my opinion, one of the most important industry topics that kind of often gets forgotten, but honestly, I think should be pushed back to the forefront, which is how do we as an industry expedite time to value? We're making investments as an industry in EV charging, and we need to expedite time to value. And then once that investment's been made, we need to be maximizing that value, really maximizing ROI. This is something we care deeply about at Electric Era. We see ourselves as a solution provider as kind of coaches and counterparts and counselors to answer those two very, very important questions. This again is the most important thing we can do well as an industry, because it ultimately helps make a good business case for EV charging, which is key. So we're going to be talking about that today a lot, and then we're going to be talking about it within the confines of a recent deployment that we did for Costco. That I think is broadly applicable to what we experience with many retailers. We work with pretty much only retailers, and they all come to us on kind of different timelines and different tracks. But zooming out, they're all on similar but parallel paths. It's a very common journey, and we're going to just kind of zoom out a little bit and draw some corollaries to what we experienced with Costco to the broader industry. So that'll be the main thrust of the conversation. Awesome. So diving into the agenda here today, we'll kick off intros here in a second, go through the case study, talk about kind of how we're doing the two things that I just talked about, expediting time to value and also maximizing value for retailers. And then we're going to have a really interesting conversation around the future of retail and EV charging. So that'll be fun. And we have an excellent panel to help us with that conversation today. So let's get started with introductions. I'll just kick it off. My name is Quincy. I'm the CEO and founder of Electric Era. Our company builds EV fast charging stations for retailers that are modernizing, electrifying their car refill services. Really excited to be here with you today. I will be your host, and I'm joined by our following guests. And maybe with that, I'll hand the mic over to Amit to start off his introduction.
Thanks, thanks, Quincy, and thanks for the time, folks. My name is Amit Patel out of Chicago. I am part of our industry strategy team at AWS/Amazon. My background is about 20 plus years, just here more as an industry strategist in all things retail and consumer goods at different companies such as Aldi, Accenture, IRI, and Insights and Analytics, and some of those domains. So happy to be here, and we'll be glad to share kind of, at least my lens of what we're seeing in the industry.
Hi everyone. My name's Emil Davitian. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Blue Dot. We're a location-based last-mile platform for retail, restaurant, and grocery. Essentially, we bridge the gap between what the consumer is doing online, for instance, online ordering, and what happens at the brick-and-mortar location. That's typically contactless pickup, but it can be contextual experiences as well. And we work with large brands. Our customers have typically included big grocery and big box retail brands, but also restaurants like McDonald's and KFC, Dunkin', NBA teams like the Phoenix Suns, and retailers like Discount Tire. And we help manage that end-to-end last mile experience for them. And then recently we were acquired by Resolve AI, a publicly listed enterprise language model that focuses on AI-powered search and voice AI for retail experiences. And so we're managing the full kind of closed loop from online to offline in conjunction with them. So excited to be here. Thanks.
All right, and I'm Lang Reynolds, VP of Site Implementation and Operations here at Electric Era with Quincy. So I've been in the EV charging industry for about 10 years now. Started off on the utility side with Duke Energy, and then spent a couple of years at Circle K, and I came over here to Electric Era at the beginning of this year. So happy to be here today and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Lang, Emil, and Amit. It's great to have you here, and excited to have such an awesome group of industry experts to give some perspective here on the questions we're all asking ourselves. So with that said, let's jump into kind of the next phase of the conversation and start, talking about the Costco case study, and then again zooming out and talking about this within the confines of the broader things that many retailers are going through. Um, so, with that said, let's set the table with kind of laying maybe from your perspective the challenges that retailers face. You come from a background of building EV charging stations for probably one of the biggest participants in the EV fast charging industry right now. Obviously, also a major retailer, Circle K. So you kind of know the ins and outs of this. Let's talk about the challenges that retailer face from your perspective. If you could provide some color there, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to. And the headline here on the left, need for speed. I think that really that really underlies the challenge. EV charging is a pretty complicated infrastructure, and the projects have a tendency to get bogged down with extended timelines from the utilities, permitting, and eventual construction as well. This is something that it's a huge challenge for retailers. I think a lot of retailers are used to projects that move a lot faster. Outside of say store construction, if you're looking at a fuel rebrand or a store interior remodel or a car wash addition, a lot of these are projects that happen in a matter of months. And when we compare that to EV charging, we see timelines dragging out into the years. This is a very extended timeline that doesn't allow retailers to really turn those stations on and start getting customers in the doors. So I think that's really a main focus for us is really concentrating on bringing those timelines down and doing everything that is needed to get chargers in the ground and operational as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And one of the things that you said that really stuck out to me was just getting people in the door. I mean, that's the whole job, right? And with long timelines, that is an extremely challenging endeavor. And Emil and Amit, I mean, any other kind of challenges that you sense are relevant to the folks on the call that are exploring their EV fast charging, business models and strategies that you would add to what Lang said?
Yeah, I mean, I can go. And I think I see it more as an opportunity versus a challenge, as we kind of think about the rise of EV charging stations, the rise of EV sales, the different consumer demographics that are across the board. I think to me, the challenge slash opportunity is how do you capitalize on that space that you have? And I call it just, right, dead space in the parking lot for all intents and purposes. But how do you really capitalize on that digital footprint that you now have in the parking lot, around the gas station? Maybe it's a hybrid format going forward. And how do you kind of contextually immerse that shopper for a few minutes that you have, right? Time is the biggest currency at the end of the day. And I think to me that engagement model is going to be super important. So I think that's where the creative genes, we can talk about retail media networks. I think folks understand that space well. Just kind of, if you look at any data out there in the industry, I believe, right, today folks are saying it's roughly north of about $55 billion, could be 2x of that in no matter of, 3-4 years. So it is on the rise. And that's a combination of digital plus in store. But there's this now new array of like what's going to happen in the parking lot for I've got 5, 10, 15 minutes, and how do you engage with me and really create that embedded image, right, of your brand, of your store, of what's happening, and how do you interact with me? I think that's going to be super important. So that to me is the biggest challenge and opportunity is the engagement model with shoppers.
Yeah, I agree with that, Amit. And I think, like for me, in terms of the industry context, I think a really good place to ground the conversation, including what Amit just ran through, is some of the changes that we've seen in retail over the last 5 to 10 years. So, there's been a massive shift to the consumer being control off premise. So everything from the app experience and omni-channel engagement online has shifted a lot of the emphasis to the consumer. You've got third-party apps and e-commerce sites that have emerged. And then when the customer is on site, they're generally spending a short space of time because everything is about convenience. And then the fulfillment happens through things like curbside pickup or drive-through or multiple delivery options. So what has that what's the impact of all of that? It means that there's been a massive shift off premise. So the vast majority of the time the consumer is spending interacting with your brand is not happening at the brick and mortar location. And it also means that there's been a real blurring of the lines between different segments and verticals. So essentially, as a consumer, you can buy the same or similar products from a whole range of different sources. And so that commodifies some of the products and services that are being sold. And it means that companies are competing with companies that they never competed with previously. And so that means that the context for the EV charging stations is that brands really have to do two things. One is increase the amount of time that they're spending with their customer on site, and also elevate the experience that they're having while they're doing it to really align that with their core business offering and their kind of the brand exposure. And I think that context where you're using EV charging stations to provide an incredible amount of value, few things are going to be more valuable than recharging somebody's vehicle. And you're delivering that value, and that gives you a entry to build a relationship and interact with that customer in a whole range of different ways, which I'm sure we'll talk through over the course of the conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome and very well said. I think you both kind of teed up the carrot at the end of this whole process that everybody's going after. This is like the golden goose of the retail adjacent fast charging industry is, can we lock in members? Can we build loyalty? Can we have a new entry point into our ecosystem? And how do we do that in a way that delights the driver and creates brand differentiation for our retail establishment? Of course, there's a long circuitous path. It depends on how you do it, I guess. Potentially a very short, not circuitous path to get to that. But let's talk about that path a little bit briefly before we. So folks are on the call are all aligned on kind of like what it takes to get to that carrot at the end of the tunnel. This was an example of that in terms of how we experienced it with Costco. But again, it's more broadly applicable to retailers that we interact with. They all kind of are coming to us with a need for speed. They have some warehouse launch, or they have a big charging station they're trying to get built. They're perhaps wrestling with trying to understand government regulations, EV mandates. Those two things really ultimately lead to the big question of, okay, should I go for fast charging? Should I go for slow charging? Which inevitably leads them to the realization that the grid is going to really delay their time to value. Again, we want to expedite time to value. We don't want delays. The grid really, frankly, delays everybody's time to value. So then, folks start asking us about, hey, what about batteries? What about solar? Can we use that to compress that timeline so we can get ROI quickly? Obviously, we all want that, and the answer is typically yes. So, at that point, great, we have a plan to go fast. Awesome. Let's start thinking about customer experience. Customer experience is our everything. We're a retailer. We really care about reliability. We care about uptime. The driver is going to associate that with our brand. We have to get reliability dialed. And then boom, that gets us to the point where we can talk about membership value. We can talk about brand lock-in. We can talk about loyalty. So let's go one at a time quickly through a couple of these. Lang, maybe if you could just briefly double click into some of the comments you made earlier around need for speed, like maybe contextualize that a little bit more and talk to us about why it matters so much for retailers to start that flywheel and to get people in the door quickly.
Sure. So this particular project, we had a very aggressive timeline. We had a customer that came to us with basically what they probably thought was an impossible challenge. Definitely the fastest deployment that I've ever seen in the fast charging space. Previously, we had a site that we built at Circle K in about 3 or 4 months, and we thought that was really good. And in this case, we had a challenge to get some chargers online in the space of less than 2 months. In order to support an opening of a new location. So with a lot of the mandates that are out there right now, retailers, whether it's a new parking facility in Washington State or if it's a gas station in Florida, for example, a lot of the new development has to have EV charging incorporated into it. So in order to open the broader store, the broader location, the chargers have to be online. So not only do you want your chargers online, you have to have your chargers in place in order to unlock the C of O for the larger development. So that's one of the driving factors. Obviously, mandates are they're one of the driving factors, and then on top of that, you have just the broader need to leverage the assets that you're investing in and make sure that those aren't just they're not just toy pieces that you're putting out there to check the box. They're actually driving value for the business, and that leads into kind of the next point that we have here, which is looking at the different power levels and thinking about the EV mandates. It's often not specified whether it has to be a level 2 or level 3 DC fast charger. So for a lot of retailers, if you think about the use case for the location and the business that they're operating, and a level 2 charger really doesn't make any sense to encourage people to sit on your lot for 8 to 12 hours in a day or something like that.
Yeah.
So DC fast charging is really the better use case for these locations, and that's what we're seeing a lot of customers migrate towards. So even though there is a mandate to install, it still makes sense to identify the technology solution that matches up with your business model and your customers' dwell time on site.
Well, it's almost impossible to like. I'm surprised that it's really customers are even looking at level 2 because to have someone on site for 8 to 10 hours just isn't feasible. That's something that you're essentially charging your household appliances with, and that level 2 is much better suited to residential settings where you can go to sleep and recharge the vehicle. Customers are looking for convenience. They want to charge, get as close to a full tank as possible in 15 to 30 minutes. And, as I think the Electric Era team often says, you don't want the charging time to define the experience on site. You want the experience to be driven by what the consumer convenience is and also what the retail engagement is like. And so, imagine the frustration that the customer charging would feel, and also others that are queuing in line waiting to charge the vehicle if you've got level 2 charging. So, I think it's pretty clear that the level 3 investment in level 3 is kind of more suited to that type of use case.
Yeah, and I like the way you put it from the perspective of the driver or the customer. Like the whole retail industry is built around this model of convenience. Like, how can we do best for that person, that person that needs a quick stop, a quick convenient retail experience, and level 2 just really doesn't get you that. I mean, in fact, it's probably going to lead to a really poor experience with your brand. But let's talk about it a little bit more from like the intrinsic value of the business. The customer obviously benefits. What about from the perspective of the business? Either Emil or Ahmed. I mean, would love to hear your thoughts, given your position in the industry, on what the intrinsic value to the corporations are, the retailers on the call are having speed.
Yeah, tee it off, Emil, and then head it over to you. I think there are two things that come to mind. One is certainly monetization opportunities for the enterprise, right? So if I'm a C-store, if I'm a retailer, if I'm any retail business that has a little bit of what we call the forecourt experience, i.e. the parking lot experience, you have a chance to monetize that space. Today, if you really look at that space, it's just a cost of doing business, correct? To have 150 spots, 5 spots, 10 spots, 15 spots. So number one is the ability to monetize through retail media networks is a huge opportunity above and beyond just paying for the charging and so on and so forth. It'd be interesting to see over time, I'd probably say 3 to 5 years, what is the true kind of return on spend of installing a EV station, running a retail media network on it, and really looking at did it pay for itself or not, in other words, and some. And if the trend is true, as we talked about earlier with retail media spending, just kind of having a trend line of 2x over the next 4 years or so, it would be pretty interesting to see if honestly if there's a self-fulfilling kind of business case out there, if you really rely heavily on kind of, and there's a buy-in from brands that reflect your specific business that have a role to play and are willing to kind of partner with you on trade spend or digital ad spend through retail media network to see if there's even. I think that's one direct monetization opportunity. The second opportunity I do think is as a brand equity matters at the end of the day, right? So I call it moments of truth, the element of surprise and delight. You've got me for 5-10 minutes, right? That moment of truth, from the moment I plug in, right? How does that display light up? So a lot of this has to do with consumer psychology. It really has nothing to do with it. It's hard to kind of measure these things. However, but if I'm in the car, I'm a Costco shopper, I got three kids, etc., right? At the end of the day, if there's an element of surprise and delight that puts a smile on my face, embeds an image of a brand, maybe it's holiday, maybe it's Starbucks, maybe it's their new coffee holiday blend that's going to be selling in store, maybe it's 35 degrees outside. Having kind of that contextual offer pop up, yes, you can't necessarily trace it to a purchase right after, but you've created an image, you've created perception, you've created a stickiness factor, you've created an element of surprise. The way you measure that is how often do I keep coming back to that exact same station over and over again, right? You can measure that over. But I think that's going to be super important in brand equity, mind share, the element of surprise. We even kind of joke around and say, hey, what if tomorrow there's a song that starts playing the moment you plug in, and right just creates a pleasant experience for you, some mood, again, there's a lot of science around moods and media and attachments related to that. So again, the way to look at it to me is that we're not doing any of that today in the parking, if you think about it, correct? So I was just looking at some stats in a Router's article on that. It's just pretty fascinating that we literally have over 140% rise in EV sales within a year. Only 22% of stations have been installed.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking to the tune of 305 million now registrations that have been made as of September of 24, and only 176,000 stations have been EV charging stations have been. The mobility factor, and then you combine that with the 10 states that that's happening in. It's fascinating that the mobility factor, the states that this is happening in, the rise, is Arizona, Florida, Texas. Guess what? They're high mobility states, right? You got to drive around a lot in layman's terms. So it's pretty fascinating to how are you going to capture those consumers with what content, and this is where the rise of like tech will also play a role, because you have to have the right content management systems, you have to have the right digital asset tools, you have to partner with the right agency, whoever you might partner with, but there's more you could do with that untapped space. So those are the two things to sum it up: is monetization and retail media networks, and second is brand equity. I like to call it brand equity overall with a shopper.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Quincy.
Go for it, Emil.
Yeah, so I'll just pick up on some of those themes because that Amit highlighted. I think, one important thing is to treat the EV charging station as its own channel that is complementary with the other ways that you're interacting with your customer. Don't treat it as just some new hardware in the corner of your parking lot. Really integrate it into the existing initiatives and deliverables from your business, because that's how ultimately you're going to build a business case internally. That's how you can align multiple business units and amplify what is already being done in loyalty, in marketing, in other parts of the business. And ultimately, that's where you're going to drive a lot of success. And that's where, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of commentary around how the role of the CIO or CTO on the one hand, and the role of, say, the CMO or the Chief Customer Officer are starting to blur. And that's because you can't just have that binary distinction that we used to have where all your marketing happens offline and then they get on site and all of a sudden it turns into a completely analog experience that you could have had 15 years ago. And so making sure that the EV is integrated into that overall strategy is important. So then once you understand that the EV charging station is a point of differentiation that is attracting customers to your site, you have to look at the digital real estate, to Amit's point, that you have. You've got a display that's in the EV charging station, and you've got an extension of the display that is the consumer's mobile. And just to put the value of this in context, in the other, I guess, deployments that I work on, I'm working with brands that are spending literally millions and millions of dollars to capture the attention of the customer for seconds, like literally seconds. And so you've got a charging experience that is 15 to 30 minutes long, where you've already delivered value. There's a real reason for the customer to interact with your brand. That is incredibly, that's a golden opportunity that most brands would kill for. And so utilizing that intelligently is obviously the name of the game. So how do you do that? You've got a range of content that you can display. You've got the lower end of the spectrum. There might be third-party content. Then you're adding value by maybe integrating more strategic partner content. And then you're getting to brand-specific content. And that could be anything from offers or rewards or communication all the way to your highest value interaction, which could be, it's different for every business. I noticed in the survey, not everybody is doing a loyalty program, but it might be member identification or some other program that you're running. So being able to give sustained exposure to that is, of course, valuable. Then being able to extend it to mobile for the rest of their time on site is really critical. Now, the good thing with EV charging is that Electric Era out of the box is allowing the customer to monitor essentially their charging experience. And so they've got a reason, as they're seeing how much their car is charged, to constantly there's an open web page on their mobile, they're looking at their device. And so how do you complement that through things like offers that are redeemed in store, QR codes, other kind of loyalty prompts, whatever it is that really engages them. And the highest value interaction you can have is something that essentially gets them out of the car and drives them into the store. And so whatever you can do to increase that foot traffic is going to be really at the higher end of the value spectrum. And I guess the gold standard is if there's a purchase done at the EV charging station that is ultimately picked up in store, or maybe an offer that is redeemed and paid for in store, that's incredibly valuable. But I think working with Electric Era on that roadmap where you can kind of start small and build out over time and get to that higher value end of the spectrum is probably the right way to go about it.
Yeah, well said. A lot of great points were just made. I mean, I think kind of one of the ones that stuck out to me was just that, hey, this is just a new means of commerce. This is a new channel, and you should think of it as such. And there's a large amount of intrinsic business or business value to your corporation, to your retail corporation as a result. And I think points were well made as well on the need for speed. I mean, too much dwell time is a bad thing. Just the right amount of dwell time is a good thing. And then the dwell time should also be natively convenient. That's how you're going to get the people there. So inevitably, given that level 3 fast charging is the right way to drive convenience, which is the right way to get the people there, which is the right way to get them in the store, many of the retailers we work with, and in this case Costco as well, found out about the grid challenges that Lang mentioned earlier. Lang, I guess if you could contextualize just a little bit more, why is it that it's so hard to get power for retailers trying to build quick and trying to build loyalty with EV drivers?
Yeah, there's a number of components to the challenge, and there's obviously some regional and local variation among different utility service territories based on a lot of factors, from starting with supply chain and the specific utilities resourcing of their design and distribution capabilities, all the way through to the construction side of things. So in general, the more power that you need, the longer it's going to take to get that power, and that comes in the form of, like I said, the supply chain. So the transformer supply, in general, larger transformers are in much longer supply. And then actually finding capacity on distribution circuit, or getting to the eventual construction of the needed upgrades as applicable for each site. So those are the different components that every utility is going to step through to get to the point of providing your new service connection for EV charging. In this case, the case study that we're talking about, we had a challenge where we only had 200 kW of AC supply available. And that's something that was set as a constraint in the project. And most other fast charge technology solution providers would really not be able to do anything with only 200 kW of grid. So I think that's one thing that really highlights the advantage of our battery back solution, and allows us to provide 600 to 800 kW of simultaneous nameplate DC output from a very small service. So moving on to the uptime side of things, as you mentioned earlier, Quincy, this is another really important factor for our customers. And this is something that I felt very painfully on the operator side of the table in both of my previous roles, where I've deployed a number of different hardware and software combinations. The uptime just components are really quite low in this industry right now, based on all of the data that we have, and looking at a lot of the different just technology providers in this space. So it's not just about the uptime; it's about successful charging attempt rates as well, and that's something that is not well understood in the industry, and not well visualized from the existing platforms either. So that's one of our other main focuses, is providing that insight into the operations to the deep level of showing how many successful sessions there have been specifically, and allowing operators to really get that granularity that they don't get with other platforms.
Yeah, and Emil, maybe you could just comment on turning that into a perspective that retailers can equate to, which is around consumer experience. I mean, consumer experience really seems to be the kind of common theme of this conversation. Is that like the right framing that we should all be thinking about this reliability and uptime problem with respect to?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the infamous saying, is it's the earn trust motion, right? So I think those are fundamentals. It's like a POS terminal not working at a store when you go to buy something. You spend 10, 15 minutes shopping, you go up and it's like, sorry, I can't process a transaction. Um, so, and to me, those fundamentals are super key. Uptime, reliability, it creates trust. And once you have trust, once you've earned that trust, so I think there's an element of earning that trust the first couple times around. I think then you can start to kind of go up the curve a little bit.
Right.
To me, it's 100% fundamental.
Yeah, and it seems like, and trust, I love the way you put that. Trust is like a good proxy word for habituation, because once you trust something, you're going to go back, you're going to go back again, you're going to go back again. And ultimately that's the foundational thesis for loyalty, member loyalty, people that establish literally a 20-year relationship with your business. And I guess, Emil, maybe I'll kick this one over to you. I mean, you talk to a lot of executives, probably talk to a lot of board members. Like, how important is that long-term lifetime relationship from your perspective, and how do you think, how would you counsel the retailers on the call to leverage EV charging to formulate net new relationships with drivers?
Yeah. So I think I do hear this a lot from the different execs that we work with. If you think about it, you've got a spectrum of customers. You've got infrequent, lower value customers that interact with your brand really opportunistically. And then you've got your high frequency, high spend, very loyal, sticky customers. And whatever you're doing in terms of your operational footprint and your marketing spend, it's all designed to move them along that spectrum. So you're having really high lifetime value and repeat customers. So when you're thinking about the day-to-day experience of a customer that is looking to, everybody's busy, they're trying to charge their vehicle, they're trying to make whatever critical purchases are for their family and for themselves, and you're delivering really high value functionality that allows them to come on site, that's extremely important. And the comment around trust is the right language. And that, if I can just touch on, for instance, the data angle of this EV charging footprint and how that
Mm-hmm.
relates to lifetime value, because trust is really at the center of it. Like, if you look at what has happened over the last 5 or so years, you've had GDPR, which are the kind of European privacy regulations, comparable, really stringent regulations in California. You've had a lot of negative publicity around data and the way that brands are using their relationship with their customer in ways that don't feel comfortable. And you've also had the operating system, so iOS and Android, that have changed their approach to data to make it more privacy centric, partly for their own interests, but in the end, the consumer is in much more control than they used to be and have to actively provide consent. So what has that meant for the data that is generated and the customer profile that retailers use to build that lifetime value? It means that instead of really having kind of relying on high volumes of third-party data that's really kind of low fidelity, you have smaller pots of data that are driven by consent. So you're talking about first-party data that is extremely high fidelity, really high reliability, that the consumer is consenting to give you. Now, why do
Right.
they do that? It's because, one, most importantly, you're delivering value, the charging. Second, you might be often giving them something additional for that in-store experience, but it's also because of the trust and transparency that they feel because they understand that you're collecting a proportional amount of data and you're using it in a way that they feel is appropriate. And so what does that mean? Like as they come to that charging experience, you're getting a number of data points. One is obviously repeat visits and what locations they're going to, what their dwell time is on site. But then also when you layer on some of the other customer data that we're talking about, the most valuable being purchase data and identifiers like member IDs or loyalty. But there's also kind of, more basic versions of that. That gives you a really robust picture of the customer that they have consented to giving. And to your point or to your question, Quincy, using that on-site experience, giving a high value, reliable experience that is valuable to the customer, and then utilizing that data to then retarget and to drive ongoing foot traffic or repeat visits. That's where you get that stickiness and ultimately that lifetime value. So looking at that data holistically, and I'd say just a final point on that. I think everybody's ambitions with data is really large, and sometimes the sophistication of internal data systems or marketing is still catching up. And so just making it proportional to that and aligning with the sophistication of your internal systems and kind of stepping through that roadmap gradually with Electric Era, I think is probably the right way to think about it.
Fantastic. And Amit, I think maybe taking what Emil said and thinking about how we have this net new commerce platform outside the store in the parking lot. I'm just curious, as one of the thought leaders in this space, what your perspective on where this all goes is. Like, we're in honestly a very transformative moment. Car refill is fundamentally changing. People are spending more time at these retailer locations. This seems like the right ingredients to actually add a lot of top line for businesses, a lot more loyalty for retailers. Talk to us about your, future perspective of where all this might go for this. That would be really helpful.
No, absolutely. And, I'll take a lens on future retail, right? And just really think about it's not about today, it's about tomorrow. I think retailers or businesses that choose to evolve with macro trends that are happening are the ones that are going to kind of hang around for a while, if you might. So evolution is key. The data is there. The growth is there. You see exponential growth, in fact. And I think how we react to that and how to get proactive with assessing what could happen is key. Because again, to me, if I am, let's just say, retailer format X, say in the C-store business, right? And I'm thinking about a next gen format. When my next gen format 5 years from now, whether it's around universities, whether it's around really progressive, states like California or others, how do I kind of construct my next gen format to really appeal to these shoppers? If I have high penetration of EVs in a certain area, I really should design backwards an experience. It's not about putting charging stations. It's really asking the question, who are these shoppers? What do they value? What are they, right? So for example, there's some press that came out earlier this week, actually, a couple of days ago. It's still fairly early in the week, but in the UK, now there's a Just Walk Out store with GridServe, which is nothing but a few bays of charging stations. Now, one would argue that that's interesting. Why? But that whole experience is centered around probably a forward-looking consumer, right? Probably a little bit higher on the tech adoption curve, but it really appreciates probably convenience. Now, it doesn't like waiting in lines, probably self-serve, probably has a sustainability angle to them, but really understanding those characteristics of these shoppers that you have, and where they live. And designing that experience around that to me is going to be super important. So I like to say from a future retail perspective is really the opportunity to look beyond a little bit and really think about new gen formats that could be constructed based on these trends that are happening. I think that's certainly number one. And then, number two, I always just like to say it's the moment of truth with shoppers, right? At the end of the day, wow and delight them. That's what's going to, once you get the fundamentals, the earn trust moment, once you have them, now you got to start to delight them along the curve. And remember, when you have, like, let's just say you have 8 bays of charging stations and you have 6 cars there that have 6 shoppers there. Now people are starting to hang out, right? 10, 15, you can design an experience around that, right? Something that a
Yeah.
group do together. So the art of the possible is certainly there, but I think it all centers around, to me, maximizing that space you have and not let it just be a static, hardware unit that is out there, but really doing more with it.
I love that. I mean, I feel like every time I talk to you, my IQ goes up 10 points. And you said it super well at the beginning, which is essentially, we need to kind of go back to first principles and underwrite our business models, thinking about this net new driver and the net new experiences that we can create for them to wow and delight them. I feel like that's the thinking cap we all need to put on, and as we think about the role EV charging will play in our future revenue streams. Lang, you've been, you were at Duke for a long time building charging stations. You went to Circle K. You actually, worked with a lot of vendors and were trying to build charging solutions for the Circle K retailer program. What advice do you have for the folks on the call to kind of, as we sum it all up here, when they're looking at solutions providers, leveraging, your historical experiences?
Well, obviously, I'm not an unbiased participant these days, but I will share. The big reason that I came over to Electric Air is what I saw lacking in the industry, which was some of what I alluded to earlier in terms of visibility on operations, knowing if chargers are going to work the first time when somebody plugs in. That's an important thing to know, and a lot of platforms out there don't really tell you that. So I think that's one of the biggest gaps that I saw in the market previously, and it's something that we're working very hard to solve here at Electric Era. And then I think on the just looking at the rest of the deployment schedule here and looking especially at the front end, working with companies that have an understanding of how best to navigate the processes with utilities and AHJs, and how to get projects into construction quickly. And again, that's something that we're very focused on in Electric Era. It starts with the people, it starts with the team, and being laser focused on moving quickly at every step of the process, and not waiting a week after you send an email to follow up with another email, but picking up the phone and calling people. And if you have to, you get on the plane and go see them in person. So I think those two things are what I would look at most strongly. Is really on the technology side. Is it a platform that gives you the visibility and control over your assets that operators expect? And then are your partners going to support you in getting those assets into the ground in a timely manner?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and kind of going back to what I said, it's like, having the visibility to know that you are delighting and wowing the driver. Like that's the visibility that you need to make sure that your investment is being maximized. And then the second half, what you said, the partnership that you need to expedite that time to value. Just as a quick note, we are going to do a Q&A in about 2 minutes. So feel free to drop your questions into the chat. There should be a little, I think, Q&A button. Go ahead and click that, and I think you can just write it on in there. We got some really smart folks on the call, so feel free to drop your questions in there. And then just before we get to that, a quick forecast for the future for everybody on the call today. We're actually going to be doing another double click into this whole discussion point and turning where we turn kind of the strategy and concept discussions that we've been having into actual business cases. That'll be the focus of the next webinar, where we can actually like double click into the real economic model behind things like loyalty, customer repeat patterns. What's the value of that? How do you actually build a business model around that? Or how do you actually properly quantify the revenue streams from the charging and the in-store? And then, also covering things like what's the economic impact of low reliability or low customer delight and wowing. And then most importantly, what does it all sum up to? What's the integrated sum total value of this lifetime value on a per driver basis? So maybe before we jump to the Q&A, Ahmed, if you have any thoughts on metrics that retailers should be focusing on to evaluate that last part, the total lifetime value of an EV customer, we'd love to hear from you briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the lifetime value of an EV customer to me is going to be centered around, trip missions, its frequency of trips, its dwell time, its engagement, And those are the 4 or 5 that to me stick out. To me, they're indicators, right? They're signals at the end of the day. They're demand signals, right? Because there's unless until you're making it a pure play transactionally kind of kiosk type thing, that's a whole different story to really conduct commerce. And like I could argue that the future of Sonic drive-throughs should be charge a EV, order a highly custom meal, bring it to you, and that becomes a transaction that could happen. But to me, demand signals are more important because at the end of the day, if I know that repeat customers keep coming back, keep spending 10 to 15 minutes, and then if somehow I can tie that to a loyalty platform that looks at transaction data, right? Emil's point earlier, then I can start to make a correlation. But to me, out the gate, I'm looking for basic customer satisfaction scores and uptime and reliability, the fundamentals. How often how many new folks are coming? When are they coming? How often are they coming back? And to me, those are signals that I could start to see a positive slope on, right, over time. And that to me is a leading indicator of I should start doing more with the space. If I'm seeing a flat line, then I need to double click and figure out, is it one and done customers and why? Why are they not coming back? I think we need to then kind of start to understand the why behind what's happening. But a steady positive slope on those 4 key metrics to me is interesting. Like at the end of the day, it's expensive, right? Value creation in retail is hard. The startup costs are hard. Opening up a new gas station, real estate, construction, design costs, all are hard. And the payback period over time is whatever that might be for a regular C store. I'm sure Lang knows that really well. But to me, I would benchmark that and say, hey, if I can get this up and running in less time, I can monetize that quicker. If it takes me, I'm making this up, 24 months to get a gas station going, if I can get this up in 9 to 12 months, what is the art of I'm talking about the future, right? I'm not talking about today, right? There's the delta. I'm starting to make money in 9 months versus 24 months, right? Especially if I'm seeing
Right.
the signals come through the pipe.
Yeah, I love it. And Emil, and I'm sure I would love to hear your thoughts, but just in the interest of time, probably jump to Q&A here. I'm sure there's a question for you as well. But I guess it sounds to summarize, it's like, what are the KPIs that lead to high maximum revenue? That we need to be thinking about and building into the model. And I think just as a note, we'll be dropping into the chat a link to the registration of that. So check the chat there briefly, and we'll go get yourself registered for that next discussion. At this point, let's jump over to Q&A. It sounds like we got some awesome questions coming in. The first one is from Courtney Davis. Thank you for your question, Courtney. So 7-week deployment is amazing accomplishment. Can you give some insight into how you were able to fast track design, permitting, and installation in such a short amount of time? Well, Lang, I think this one's for you.
Sure. So yeah, like I mentioned, this is definitely the fastest installation I've ever been a part of, and a big part of this was the aggressive timeline from our customer, and the fact that this was a new store build that was already in progress. So essentially, we were challenged with revising the design to include our chargers versus another solution. And again, confident to say that this is really not something that I think another company could have delivered on the same timeline. When you look at the fast charging output need versus a very skinny electric service, and trying to put a number of chargers on a site in order to support the number required by the state in order to open a new facility. I really don't think that there's really a solution out there. There are some companies that are providing storage back solutions, but not backing it up with the implementation, the implementation support to get the chargers in the ground. So really about using our standard designs. That's another feature that allows us to move through the design process quickly. We have standardized designs based on the size of the site and the configurations needed, whether that's from the charger or from the size of the battery, and putting those components together into standards that can be easily replicated across sites. And then in this case, we did have, I think it's safe to say that nothing would happen this fast without some support from the AHJ and utility. So close collaboration with those with the subject matter experts at those respective entities was really key to getting this over the finish line. And that's something that we really drive in all of our projects as well, is just making sure that we have very close lines of communication with the local entities that oversee these different locations.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and good summary of that first kind of question we asked at the beginning of the conversation. How do we expedite value? You hit on a lot of the really important points there, Lang. I think standardizing designs and working really closely with the authorities having jurisdiction and utilities is kind of like the big key unlock. Second question here, it looks like let's see, what is the max charge rate, and then how long can the battery hold up throughout the day? So I'll just answer this one quickly. The max charge rate per charger port is 200 kilowatts, and then we size the battery from a standard configuration of options to basically last the entire day at peak utilization. So we actually have a proprietary software, PowerSim, that we use to do all that energy modeling. So we can model 10,000 days, a bunch of different car charging profiles, basically take all that randomized data, turn it into sizing so that the retailer and the driver can have great experiences throughout the entire day. Great question. Looks like why the assumption that everybody needs a full charge while they're shopping? Seems many level 2 chargers could provide more usefulness to customers than just level 3 that are frequently occupied and unavailable. I think this might be a good one for Emil. You talked a lot about kind of speed and convenience being like the leading wedge to get the driver there. Maybe just double click on that for a second to help contextualize the differences between a value from a driver's perspective between level 2 and level 3.
Yeah, so typically this, when you look at this is just kind of generic information as opposed to electric era specific. But a level 2 charger might charge anywhere from 10 to 60 miles of range in an hour, whereas level 3 is doing 60 to 100 miles every 20 minutes, right? It's just orders of magnitude faster. And so when somebody wants to charge, if they have to spend over an hour just to get 10 or 20 miles of charge, that equation just doesn't work. People are typically out of their home or out of work for short spaces of time where they have to use their time efficiently. And so you're not going to get the same value exchange. And so what that leads to is essentially lower value, which means that the likelihood of the repeat customers is lower. And also, if they're spending an inordinate amount of time at the store, it means that you're going to have longer queues waiting for those charges. So it's going to be a frustrating experience for the driver and also for others. And I just don't see how, asking a customer to wait potentially for hours is really feasible in the modern retail context. And so it seems like the final point, I know we're short on time, is that, you're making investments that are for 10 to 15 years of rollout and utilization and what drivers are going to need in the future. And so making sure that you've got, future-proof technology is an important lens to take on it.
Yeah, and I would just add on that, Emil, if you think about these locations and how much time people are spending, you can kind of back into how much energy they might get, and are they willing to pay for that, or are they going to go to that location because that energy is an added benefit? And if you think about these stops are going to be between 10 minutes and 45, 50 minutes, somewhere in that range. The amount of energy you get on level 2 charger is just not significant, and nobody is really going to go out of their way to make that choice, I would say.
Yeah, excellent. And then maybe just one final thing that's probably been stated partially is just the higher speed gets you more throughput, and obviously, we want people in and out, in and out, in and out. That's net new opportunities to conduct commerce with them. Excuse me. All right, maybe last question here. We have about 2 minutes left. Actually, maybe two more. So this is a good one. It says, what are some examples of those components that will wow customers? How do we wow and delight our customers? I would say that's a great question. I would encourage, if you have that question, to come talk to our team. We have some awesome folks that are working through these types of problems with retailers across the country. Would love to brainstorm with you. Everything from, I would just say briefly, things like point of sale extension is a great way to wow and delight customers, giving them an opportunity to actually conduct commerce with your store to kind of prime the pump and get a transaction going before they go in and actually pick it up. That creates even more convenience and more value for them. So think about it from that perspective. Like, what can you do on this net new commerce platform that wows and delights the customer. And honestly, anything that's digitally interconnected to the inside of your store is in the possibility space. So hopefully that helps answer your question, Maggie. And then feel free to reach out to our team directly for more detailed looks into that. And then let's see, one more question. I think this is an interesting one. Can you share a bit more about the best relationship to the grid tied charging model? Basically, how do we make sure that we're managing peak charging rates and avoiding, high energy bills and making sure the margins for the charger are as good as they can be? Lang, do you want to just close out with that question? Uh, Lang, are you able to hear us? Looks like Lang's on mute. So I'll just answer that quickly and just say basically our software dynamically detects when the most expensive time of use rates are, when the most expensive demand charges are. We actually take that into our controls algorithms for the energy software that runs the whole charging station, the battery, the charger, and the connection to the grid. And we chop it down to keep it as low as possible. That way we maximize your margins. So you can affordably run your charging station, actually make profit on it, and then pass that value along to your members and drivers. With that, that's we're at time, folks. Really want to thank you all for coming today. Again, we have another webinar coming up soon, so that's actually in the chat, the registration link. Thank you all to our panelists as well, and look forward to seeing you next time.